Hello, welcome back. Sean here, Mountains Garage on a beautiful Sunday morning. Thanksgiving week is coming up. I guess technically the week starts on Sunday, so here we are. My wife and son have gone on a trip of a lifetime to Japan, so I have lots of available shop time to keep me busy. So I have a few projects going on, but I thought I'd just take a minute to update the process of building a dot-blocked former Ilmor engine NASCAR block and all the associated parts. So I pretty much covered the short block the last time we talked and briefly mentioned the heads. And the heads I was planning on running. This one here is as cast at 250 cc. Now let me back up. This is my first foray into LS7 land. LS1, the original cathedral port stuff, which makes a ton of power. There's nothing wrong with it. Then they went to the LS3 style, rectangular port. And I haven't actually assembled one of those, but I've been collecting parts. I'm pointing where you can't see, but I have a set of Corvette low mileage rectangle port heads, and I had a rectangle port intake, and that was the direction I was going to go someday. Never planned on getting into the LS7 stuff right away, but here we are. So the Ilmor 396 is LS7 based, loosely anyway. And I am going through the learning curve about the differences, even in the LS7 hardware, and we're going to highlight some of that here. But so in the last video I just talked about the short block some, and only briefly commented on the heads. Now, when I bought the block, there was lots of other random bagged parts, all from the Ilmor program, all with the red reject tag. Every bag looks like this, gives you the mileage, what engine they came out of, and, oh, this is interesting. I told you in one of the other videos, I've been studying about the Ilmor program, and when they made their 200th Aker engine, it was a big deal because their success rate at that point had been fantastic. Out of the 160,000 miles they've already raced, maybe that was before the 200th engine even, there was like a 1% failure rate, or engine or DNFs did not finish, which is pretty incredible. I just now am reading this tag. I noted the mileage, which was incredible, but this is out of the Aker engine number 200. That's a piece of history. I have the article about this engine, and oddly enough, this bag of valves, which is what it was, has 82.58 miles on it. It says it overheated. On 5/17/2022. So that's not that long ago. So this set of valves, they automatically cycle out because the engine overheated and it didn't finish the race, which is pretty rare, so they probably junked the whole engine for all I know. I don't know. But I'm glad we found this together. That's a piece of history right there. So when I bought the block, I bought two sets of valves. You know, they're $100 a bag with the PSI springs, the titanium retainers, the full set of titanium intake valves. These are $1,200 a set minimum, just for 8 intake valves. The exhaust, right here, are a filled valve. From what I've read, I believe they're Manley. Again, these are 220, 2.20, the head size. The exhaust are 1.625. What makes these valves unusual, because these heads didn't exist in my world yet, very expensive. I was trying to low buck a set, so offshore castings with good hardware is pretty common right now in the marketplace. It's not the shame of having the offshore casting because it's actually pretty decent. Your only concern is the machine work, and as long as the valve guides don't fall out, which doesn't seem to be very prevalent, you know, it's just a hunk of aluminum. So yes, there could be cracks and porosity and stuff like that, but it looks pretty nice. So you got to believe at least they're doing something right. And again, it's a lot of companies are selling offshore castings with, American-made machining and hardware. So this being my first, dive into LS7 hardware, I didn't realize the valves I had were so unique. What makes them unique is the dart head. A stock LS7 valve length, I believe, is 4.95, just under 5 inches, 4.950. That's way too short for these larger heads. I don't have any stock LS7 heads to compare to, but I'm going by specs I read online. So the valves out of the Ilmor engine that fit the dart head are 4.95, almost 5.5 inches. Titanium, this is the intake. I determined that these are way too long. I would have to have crazy spacers, and the rock-around geometry is all wrong in this imported head. So those weren't going to work. So I bought a set of stainless valves because my budget and need for titanium isn't there. This isn't going to be super high RPM engine. I mean, we're going to cap it at 7,000 maybe. And you can run a titanium valve up to around 8,000 RPMs. You start having valve spring trouble. That's too heavy. My big block Chevy 572, I had a 2.30 intake valve, turning 8,000 RPM, slightly more, and I would eat valve springs. And I talked to K-Motion, a valve spring company, and they said, you're the textbook case of the threshold where you need titanium valves. Titanium valves have some drawbacks. You can't reface them because they have a coating on them. You can't even lap them in. So if the valve job is right, they fit the head, you run them until they're not usable anymore. So, but clearly looking at the mileage, most of the I have 4 bags of valves now. Most of the mileage is 2,000 miles when they were replaced. So the engine was probably rebuilt at least one time, and they didn't replace the valves. And they still look absolutely brand new in my world, especially when you have 4 sets of them, 4 sets of everything. When you have spare anything, you seldom need it. If you take off across country without a spare tire, you're probably going to need it. If you got 2 spares in the trunk, you won't have to stop. That's the way it works. So I bought some 5.200 intake valves for the Chinese head, and I have some 5.200 long exhaust valves coming, but in stainless. And so what's the difference? Again, this valve is 250 thousandths longer. It's still 41 grams lighter than the stainless valve. That's pretty significant. So that being what it is, I will have all the pieces to assemble the Chinese head, and that'll have to be on another project on another day. It half crossed my mind to pick up another block like that dart block. You see how the things snowball in my mind? There's no reason why I can use these on a stock block. I won't be able to use the extra set of bolt holes. Speaking of Chinese parts and the extra sets of bolt holes, it didn't take me long to figure out there's a few differences between the GM Performance block and the Dart block. One being, on the GM Performance block, that's an 8mm bolt right here. Same as used up here. So, on the Dart block, they run a 3/8 bolt here. Stud, actually, or a bolt. So you have to bore these out, which I did. That is no fault of the Chinese head manufacturer. But in all Chinese parts, they bought an American-made part, no doubt, and they copied it. And then they make mistakes. This happens in most all your Chinese parts. I'm not picking any company in particular, but my favorite expression I just coined the other day was, every box of Chinese parts has hidden disappointment. Either you'll find it first, or it will find you. But either way, there's disappointment in there somewhere. And disappointment in this case means you have to do more work to make it fit. So, I had to bore these out to 3/8, no big deal. The thickness here is too much. You either have to recess for the washer or machine this down 100 thousandths. That's the difference between the Chinese head and the dot head that actually fits the dot block. No big deal. I can machine that off. None of this is insurmountable. You just have to be prepared to pay for your sins. The last thing, and this is the most frustrating because this is the simplest mistake that they probably made with every Chinese head out there, and somewhere down the road it's going to bite them or bite the installer. There's studs on the 6-bolt cylinder head blocks that thread into these holes, 1, 2, 3, 4, and when you set the head on the block, you put nuts inside the lifter valley in these 4 spots on both sides, just like you do in a big block Chevy aftermarket block, so you have more cylinder head clamping. Universally accepted, the dot head, the dot studs, all expect this to be fine thread. These 4 5/16 should be fine thread. Guess what thread the Chinese head is? It's coarse thread. So you can't just re-tap that. So someday, before I'm able to use them on a 6-bolt block, I'll put it in the mill and bore it out and put a helicoil in it. Which isn't a bad, these are direct threaded in the aluminum. A lot of the aftermarket American-made heads, they're all helicoil anyway when you buy them. Like the Dot Pro ones that I had are all helicoil. I haven't looked at these yet, but so again, just got to put it in the mill, bore out 4 holes, change the thread, because I still want them to be, I want them to fit the stock stud set that I paid $500 for. So I found the disappointment, come up with a plan B. These are usable, but I don't have to. And here's why. A few more things I need to note about the Chinese head. An LS7 combustion chamber is 70 cc. The pistons that I have would be perfect if I had a 70 cc combustion chamber. The valve angle on an LS7 head is laid over or stood up at 12 degrees. This half LS7, half LS3 head, because that's the mistakes that were made when they designed it, this is 15-degree valve angle, just like an LS3. And the the combustion chamber is 60 cc's. So I was doing some quick compression calculations, thinking I'm getting higher than I really want to be for a boosted application. But I was going to deal with it in one way or the other, be it race gas or methanol, something. That still remains to be seen because the dot head I have not, they're advertised out of the box at 66 cc's, but those were the heads that were available to the public. These heads, the part number ends in ILM, Ilmor. It says Ilmor right on them. Likely they were never even available to the public. I don't know, but when I Google the number, all the digits come up as a dot 285 CNC head, but it doesn't finish with the Ilmor. So I don't know what they did different for them that the general public may or may not get or want. So I'm going to have to CC the head, was going to anyway. So these are 285. They're absolutely huge. CNC ported, beautiful, out of this world head I would never dream of owning or being able to own unless even if I had the money, I'm not sure I'd spend it all on a set of heads like this. Thousands and thousands more than I would expect to spend. However, my buddy Charlie, originally who started this whole mess, wanted to buy a block, and he got a GM Performance block, and he bought, at the time they had heads and stuff, 1 or 2 sets. So he got as many parts as he possibly could, including these heads. Now he's into his build, and he wants to get a different head from the same supplier, 3V Performance down in North Carolina. Tom Vigu, great guy. He's going to buy heads from Tom, along with a rotating assembly. I bought these heads just the other day. already. There's some pros and cons. Again, I'm hoping I can make the combustion chamber work without having to buy a different set of pistons, because that's where this whole thing started. Low bucking my motor together, I found a really inexpensive set of Marley forged pistons. That remains to be seen. Other interesting changes Dot chose to make. This O-ring groove is in the head for the intake manifold. Typically, that's on the intake. It's on my LS7 intake. Now, Dot makes a matching manifold. Unported, as cast, 1600 and change, almost 1700. CNC version 2600 plus. So probably, unless I can find a used one, won't have one of those. It's a giant, nice looking manifold. I got plenty of hood clearance, so that's not a problem. But those future Sean problems. I need to get the engine assembled first, so I now have 2 cylinder heads, 4 sets of valves, 2 sets of rockers. These take a rocker stand and run a stock rocker. These were cast in. Got company, I'll be back. Sorry about that, a couple hours later. Had a fun visitor, always an experience. Most LS7 heads, or at least some, or LS heads in general, have the rocker pedestal made into the head. Others have it separate, and the bolts from the rockers go down through the stand. I actually prefer this because if one of them gets damaged slightly, it's replaceable. Otherwise, you're attempting to repair the head or replace it. So I apologize in the last couple videos where I'm sitting here. The shadow from the quarter panel and the light above it kind of hides my face, but probably the more I hide it, the better off we all are. That's it on a Sunday. Catch you later in a couple days. Take care.